Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Catalina Manea. She is our special guest again this week and design systems expert. I'm so thrilled that she's agreed to join us for a part two of this awesome training. Last week was amazing. If you couldn't be here, I'm sorry, but there is a recording. Just a little secret. There is a recording available. It's on the YouTube channel. I'm not promoting it out, but I will tell you to go and find it if you want to, after this, of course, to kind of watch the first part as well. So anyway, this is being recorded today again. So if you have to cut out early, we understand. We hope you could stay the whole time. This is going to be really good. It's going to be amazing. This is such an important topic. Design systems are important anyway, but figuring out how to implement them and work in collaboration with your development and engineering team is really important as designers. So I know y'all are going to get a lot out of this. I'm going to get a lot out of this. I'm really excited selfishly. So yeah. Anyway, this is Catalina. Please welcome Catalina in the chat, and also yeah, I'm gonna just hand it over to her right now. So Catalina, take it away. And by the way, before I do that, I apologize. There will be a Q&A session toward the end, so be thinking about questions you may want to ask. You can ask questions in the chat along the way, or it'd be great if you would be willing to unmute your mic at the end whenever it's the time to do it, and then ask your question personally. So I'll leave that up to you. Anyway, take it away.
Fingers crossed for sharing screen.
Okay.
Like with everything in Mac, I need to give permissions for every single step that I'm
Of course.
making. 1 second. Okay.
How's everybody doing? Everybody doing well? All right, I see some familiar faces. Todd and Mike. My manager Mike's here. What's up, Mike? Good to see you, man. All right.
Good to see you.
Okay.
Yeah, right on.
So I'm not gonna spend too much time on this slide because I think it's a little longer presentation, as I have a big passion for the UX and developer collaboration also when it comes to design systems. So I'm Catalina. I'm in Cleveland, a very sunny place currently. Feel my sarcasm. I'm originally from Romania, and then in my free time, I like to partner with developers and product owners and just bring ideas to life. I started out as a graphic designer and slowly moved into web design, and then I found my passion and I decided to stick with UX design. So design system actually became my passion a couple of years ago when I had the opportunity to listen to Brad Frost at a conference in Cleveland. He actually was a private event in Cleveland he had. So that was the moment when everything clicked for me, and I started doing a lot of research in regard to design system, talk to people, and even speak about systems. So this is a real tweet that I came across last year. Every discussion of design system ultimately becomes a discussion about buttons. And this is super accurate because everybody talks about only UI components and what's the best way to make things work and how to transfer your system from Sketch to Figma and how to create different layers. And then some things focus on the development side as well, but there are a lot of articles out there regarding tools. And I feel like there's not enough related to the process of things. And we do need process because otherwise design systems fail. So this is a quote that also I came across last year, and it's from UX Collective, and they are saying that we should be spending less energy on creating new components and focus our attention on understanding the systems behind the design. And that last part, like system behind the design, stuck with me for a long time, and I started like thinking about it and thinking about its meaning and what does it mean to me when we think about system behind the design. You have the processes behind the system. So the processes that teams put together and then companies put together when it comes to developing. So, but behind those processes, you essentially have people, and those are the people that you work with on a daily basis. architects, customer care, developers, product, QA. I mean, you name it. Based on the name of the project and your company and what you're doing, you might end up working with even with more people than the ones I mentioned here. And then processes, and processes go, obviously, the actual process that, again, like every single team and company has it put together, but also tools. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of resources out there in regards to tools and what tools we should be using and when and which one is the best. But today, I'm not going to talk about tools. I briefly touched on that last week. It's really tough to recommend tools. It's even tough to recommend processes. So take everything with a grain of salt, and I hope that through this presentation you can at least take some parts and implement it in your company. Obviously, a lot of things will have to be adapted to your culture, to the company culture, team maturity, and so on. So this is the classic UX process. If you look it up online, you can find it all over. UXers always start out by understanding the problem, and then we do the research and analysis. We gather all the data we need. We have the design phase when we have like the go, no go, the stakeholders. We go through a validation phase, A/B testing, and then you have the design handoff, and developers are seeing our design. And then we're done. And then we move on to the other project. But in reality, when that happens, things fail. Because the chances, if the developers are seeing your design for the first time, they're going to push back because you're going to run into all sorts of tech limitations and things that we didn't account for in our design. And then that's when we become a roadblock. And if we become a roadblock, there are two different scenarios. One, we never get to be part of the project anymore, or I honestly don't know which one is worse. Maybe you guys can tell me in the chat and share some of your experiences, but this is one, right? You become a roadblock, people don't involve you in projects anymore. And then number two is you're seeing your work in final, in production, and it looks nothing from what it's supposed to be looking like. So I don't know which one is worse. I've been through both, honestly. This one is scary as well, and then you have to do the UI inventory, and then a lot of the work that we're doing ends up being the backlog, and then it might never be changed, might never be improved. So there's clearly a problem, and we need to change something, and we need to change something about ourselves and to see how we can make ourselves more clear. And someone keeps telling me at work, being clear is being kind, and focusing on clarity and what does that mean when we work with others. So this is the classical process that UX team have, and then that's when we start bumping heads with developers, stakeholders, and all sorts of people. And this process ends up causing a lot of tech debt and design debt, and you have like projects going over the budget. We don't really have a process. I mean, it's just like throwing designs over the wall and hoping it's making it to production the right way. You don't collaborate or communicate really. You just do it within your own team, but you don't do it cross teams. So obviously with that, you also have a huge lack of transparency in your process and what you have. And we are also not using common terminologies and language. And most of the time as UX designer, I think there's this expectation that just because we use a specific software or because we do something, or we love using a lot of buzzwords and UX methodologies that people might not understand, and it's normal because they never worked with us or they don't have any UX background. Same how we don't have development background. So how can we create a process in a way that supports collaboration for a design system? Because if we end up having this process, the design system is also going to fail, because I don't know if you're part of last week's session. Last year, and actually 2 years ago, I started doing some research and interviews and surveys with UX designers and developers. And I was asking developers and UXers, like, hey, who do you see who should be owning the system? And it was like a 50-50, you know. UXers were saying it should be UX designers, developers were saying, well, it should be developers. There were some people that said it should be a common effort. But you see where that split happens when our process is not transparent and clear enough. So how can we change that so that we support collaboration for a design system so that this design system can grow and support the products at our company? So I think everybody has a say, no matter what level you're in the organization, whether you're in a lead role or you're starting out fresh in UX and you have like background in other tech areas. So developer experience is a term that I got myself familiar with 2 years ago. And I researched it, and I know that when we talk to developer experience, some people think about the way how developers understand and read APIs, but I think it goes beyond that. It goes beyond implementation of things. So it's a matter of like how we communicate and how we treat them and how we create that developer and user experience process. And there are several different ways to do that. Number one is applying UX methodologies when we work with them. So observing their behavior, listening to the problems, understanding the current pain points, and applying UX research methods to improve those. So for instance, at my previous company, when we were working to implement the design system, I was looking into Pattern Lab, which is a tool that Brad Frost provides to the community. So I wanted to have developers try a beta project and see how that feels for them. But by working with them, I understood that I would be introducing another tool in their workflow, and it's going to make their job more complicated than it already is. So instead of doing that, we actually ended up leveraging some of the existing tools and methods that they were using in development, and it worked out a lot better. And obviously, the adoption process was way better because we listened to their thoughts, and it made sense, and it was implemented and integrated in their process. Creating microcultures, it's another one. So every single company has a macrocultures, and those macrocultures sometimes can be so rigid. And because they are so rigid, it makes collaboration very, very difficult. But I think, again, like by making ourselves open and available and being inclusive, and being inclusive doesn't just say like, hey, how are you? And just saying hello to someone on a hallway or on Skype, but including people in your process. So gaining trust and being predictable, we often ask like people don't trust us. Well, they don't trust us because we don't build a pattern, and because we don't build that pattern, we are not predictable. So create those microcultures by inviting developers to ideation sessions, uncover those tech issues early enough in the process, so maybe together we can create better solutions than what we're thinking of. Think Agile. I know this is a very tough one, especially if you're a researcher. I'm not sure how many researchers we have on the call today, but it's very important to work on smaller increments. And another thing that I have noticed when I work with different teams or crews in different projects, after the design is completed, I want to be part of their process as well and see how else I can support them. So oftentimes, again, if people never worked with UX before, they do follow their agile ceremonies like the stand-ups and the sprint planning and all the fun things. So I'm asking as a UXer to become part of those, so that way I can be aware of the things that they're working on and understand where I can support areas where the designs might need to be tweaked. I call this part of the process like picking up breadcrumbs, like kind of like the leftovers and the little pieces and use cases that we didn't account for. So this is very important. Now, if you are a UX researcher, I think this is a completely different topic, like how to make your UX team agile. But the UX researcher doesn't necessarily have to work in increments, because if research is built as a culture and if it happens at all time, then you don't necessarily need to work in increments. And even as a designer, when you work on a project, you do have that research as a foundation to start things out with. And then as you're moving along, you can dive deeper into certain areas. Speak the language. I know there are a lot of ongoing conversations whether UXers should be able to code or not. I mean, I think it's helpful. I see a gap. Like right now, I have an app idea and I'm trying to work with, and last time my app failed because I had to hire a developer. So I'm doing research as much as I can. I'm trying to educate myself in the area, at least to have that awareness. So when we talk about tech stacks and tech packages, at least I understand what they're speaking of. I understand their language. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have to code the same way they do it, because just like we are subject matter experts in the area, that's their job from a development perspective. So we should at least understand what they're trying to do. So this is my interpretation of developer experience. As I mentioned, it goes beyond that, but these are the things that I think we can focus on as we are working with developers. Now, this is a systematic approach, and I think this one might need buy-in from the leadership. So again, like this is the classic UX approach, but instead of working in silos at each individual step, being more open and collaborative. So for instance, some of the Agile methodologies are impact mappings, or you can do mind mappings, all sorts of mappings and brainstorming sessions. So when those happen early enough to understand the problem, invite software architects or tech leads, invite product and customer support. So software architects will be the ones that have the biggest understanding of, hey, what's happening in the back end. Maybe the problem we are looking at has to do with loading time. Maybe it's, some pages are not fast enough, or even security. Maybe we're going through, I don't know, redesigning a login page or a sign up page. So building those standards in the organization with them and having them at a table early enough, it's going to ease up our design process. Data gathering and analysis. So in the past and currently, I've worked with QA. I know that if people work in QA, it's a pain point because they have to wait all the way till the end of the project, and they don't have that much awareness when it comes to design and what comes up through the pipeline. So the easiest way is to involve them as well, because they do have that awareness. Sometimes they know the applications better than product. They live in those applications all the time. So there might be edge cases that we are not aware of. They can look through old test scripts or all sorts of test scripts that they have, if they have standards as a team as well. When it comes to things like that, that can help us. And it also builds that predictability for them when they go towards the end for the testing. They already know how things need to behave, so it's not a surprise to them. Design, obviously, when we design, don't involve just product to get the buy-in. Involve product to get the buy-in as a final step, but maybe try to run some co-design sessions with developers. If your UX team is mature enough, run some rapid prototyping with them as well, so you don't have to do like pixel perfect designs. And then when you go into validation, invite developers and product to observe. And then that way, when developers are going into the development process, they actually know why we build things a certain way, and they can raise up those concerns early enough. And then obviously for the design handoff, when that happens, I don't think it needs to be anything official, because by that point, they were fully aware of our process. They knew what we'd been through. So, and nothing should be a surprise to them. So I think our job is not over. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Agile. So I think Agile can support UX if understood the right way, and if we look at the actual principles and what Agile stands behind. So if we can, obviously I understand that if you work on multiple projects as a UX, it will be very difficult to attend to every single stand-up or backlog that they might have going on, but at least to have visibility into the backlog, that will help to at least know the tasks that the developers will be working on as we move along. And then obviously sprint reviews and post huddles, that is the time when we'll go through the design and see if everything was implemented correctly. Retrospective, it's also very important. Depending on the company culture and who you're working with, UX can become part of those retrospectives if we are close enough to them, and if we can be part of that safe space, it's great, because that's a time when you can go through all of the project, reflect upon it. There are several different methods for sprint retrospectives as well, and you can reflect on those things and improve them. So next time when you're working on a project, you can address those pain points and make things even better. So we talked about process, we talked about a more open and collaborative process so we involve everyone, but let's see how can design system help us solve those problems and initiatives. So when we talk about design systems, again, like when we put the design system together, it is not just UX, it is UX. There's product and marketing guidelines that exist even before UX was part of the organization, and obviously technology comes to the table and has a huge part of it. And all of those people gather together and come together, and we're putting together the design system principles, and those are the guiding principles on how our design system is going to work. By obviously, with time, those principles can evolve and change as well. But think of the design system as it has different layers. So the UX layer, it is going to involve component design. You're going to have usage guidelines, accessibility guidelines built into those components or tokens. Then you have the product and marketing side of things that includes typography and colors and logos and all the things that, again, were part of the style guide years ago. And then obviously things from the technology perspective, the tech stack, usage guidelines for developers as well, like how to use classes and CSS style sheets from the component library, and naming conventions that UX and technology worked on it together. So when we talk about design systems, there are two different design systems that we can use towards our favor. And it also goes back to the UX team maturity stages. So when you are in the beginning and when you start fresh, and let's say you have a team of 1 and 2 people and you're still involved mid-sprint and you're mostly working on user interface projects, you're probably not going to have time to focus on the value of a design system, and you're not going to be able to sell things by focusing on consistency as well. Like you'll have to focus on accessibility and way bigger problems than making things look clean and consistent. Although consistency, it is part of single A accessibility guidelines. So you can focus on internal the internal processes and how we can make that process more clean and articulated better when we deliver our designs and our work to developers and product teams. So that's when the internal design system comes in place. So think of the internal design system as a library, but you can make it an actual design system. So again, you have that transparency with the teams that you're working on. So you're going to be having an internal design system, basic UI components from like drop downs and buttons and radio buttons and checkboxes and you name it. But the point of it is to have that one voice. So when you deliver your design, instead of having different designs, so like let's say I work and Jason, let's say we are on the same team, maybe you have a way of delivering design and I have a way of delivering my design, and we don't have that common knowledge. So if I work for the first time with a team that Jason worked on, that team's expectations will be different because they never worked with me and they already have a pattern built from working with Jason. So I'm not going to be predictable. So there will be trust issues and where our interests will be clashing again. So the internal design system will help articulating that solution and will help us focusing on solving the problem rather than focusing on creating those elements every single time when we have to create a prototype. So it is meant to be helping everyone to design fast. And again, like no more POCs from the development perspective. It can help us with rapid prototyping. And it is meant to be consumed only by the UX team. However, it can be transparent so other teams have visibility to it. And then obviously the external design system, that's the one that everyone knows about, and it's helping with accessibility. It helps for a faster implementation, and it's consumed by developers, even QA, like if they're building something that, let's say, impacts the UI and they don't know how a tertiary button is supposed to behave because our prototype might not be like focusing on the micro interactions, then that's the time when they can address the external design system and know how those things are supposed to behave. So the external design system has a life cycle, and I briefly touched on this last week as we were discussing about design system behavior, and it goes through several phases as any other product through the software development life cycle. So when you start out, you're going to have the minimum viable system. Think of it like the pilot phase. So let's say when you start out your design system, let's say your team right now is mature enough and your organization has an understanding of UX, and you get to be involved in a larger initiative projects, you can pilot, right? Like it's really tough for people to invest 100% without really seeing the value. So the pilot will help you sell the value of the design system, and you're going to be able to build that baseline. And you know you're at the stage if you still have some UX development misunderstandings, and the design system might not be a priority. So you're not going to have a dedicated team at this point. You're going to try to work into your process. And although it is not a priority, you will notice that everyone will want to be part of the decision. But when it comes to the maintenance of the system and how to make it work, nobody really wants to be part of it because it's a big responsibility. The minimum viable design system. So you already got the buy-in, people saw the value, you're past the pilot. The pilot, you would probably do it either with a single shared token, or you can identify one project that's coming down through the roadmap and find any type of UI components and develop those ahead of time. But when you're at the post-minimum viable design system, you already have that process defined. So you already know how you're going to work through the governance of the design system and how you're going to maintain it. You have the tools figured out by this point. The internal processes are already addressed, and you start to add a couple of design system things to your roadmap. And sadly, I mean, I don't think, and I don't know if there's ever a company out there that does this, but I've never come across a company that will ever put a project into their roadmap to uplift their UI or solve consistency as a project on its own. So those things will be built in as you're moving along. And then the last phase is when you are going to have the robust system. You already addressed some things like tech debt. You have the process is applied. It's not just defined, like it's already second nature. And you're looking at the design system beyond consistency. So right now your system is in a good spot. It doesn't mean it's over though. You're going to still have iterations, and there will still be growing pains while trying to keep up with technology. So we talked about the design system. Now we talked about the process. So let's see how those things can coexist on both systems, actually, on the day-to-day processes. So when we look at understanding the problem, you can look at the external design system. So you understand the problem of the interface and how the user behaves with those things, and you already start getting an idea before you're even ready to solution on how you want to address those things. So you're going to be looking at the component library and understand if there is a need to build anything new or not. And that's also available during the data gathering and analysis. So you will be looking to see at any possible future UI components, because that's the time when we do an inventory, we do the content analysis, we can address any accessibility issues. And those components are not already existent. When we go into the design process, as we are developing our design, we do develop those elements. We do develop those elements with the design system in our mind. So it goes back to that reusability. You don't do it just for a product, you do it for across the organization. So you're going to be using the internal design system for creating out the proof of concept. So before you go into high fidelity, pixel perfect design, make sure that the product owner and the stakeholders, whoever else needs to be on the same page with you, we'll do that through the proof of concept. So you just, at that point, essentially, you're just focusing on the workflow, if you're not going to be focusing on the pixel perfect interface. And then when you're ready for the pixel perfect interface, that's when you can use the external design system and prep those things as well for the developer. And then when you go into the validation phase, you're not going to test only the new design and the prototype, but you also test the new components. So if you have several different versions on how you want things to behave, that's the time when you are going to be doing some A/B testing. And then design handoff, again, you're going to be building your high fidelity prototype by using the external design system, but also you're going to have those new elements and prep those new elements for the developers. So depending on the tools that you're using, if you build a high fidelity prototype in Photoshop or Sketch, like there's Zeppelin, there's InVision, there's several different ways how you can have that inspect tool for the developer for them to actually get the specs, so you don't have to manually enter everything, because that's a huge pain point. So this system is actually helping us to build a robust enough design system that with time it can really get so big and so robust that we will end up needing a design system team, a dedicated team to take care of it and maintain it at all times. So we have the system. Congratulations, let's say it's completed, right? So how do we know it's actually working? We have to measure success, just like with every other project. Hopefully everyone measures success. Not everyone measures success, but hopefully everyone's moving towards that direction. So what can we measure when it comes to design system? Components usage. So we can look at analytics. We can see how often things are accessed within our files or within the actual design system. You can measure the satisfaction of the stakeholders or developers just by doing interviews or any type of surveys or contextual inquiries. Reduction in tech and design debt. I know that user satisfaction is not really like a tool to measure, a method to measure, but if you have increased user satisfaction and if the application performance is higher, then obviously we are doing a great job and the design system was able to address those things. Project budget benchmarking, so look at the stats before you actually have the design system and after. So also from a development perspective, trying to understand like how long are developers spending time fixing bugs versus creating new things and so on. And then dev satisfaction, again, like surveys and even through adoption, really. Like if people talk about it and if they're happy, that's enough. And then just as I mentioned, time spent fixing versus creating. Scrum masters, at the end of each sprint, they do measure Scrum productivity. And through that, you can actually see how much you were able to accomplish within a sprint. So these are just a couple of ways that you can measure the design system adoption. So with that, I am done. I want to leave you with a task. Think about this quote, and we're halfway through 2020. When I did this presentation first time, it was actually beginning of 2020. So try to understand what this quote means to you and what are the system behind the design and how can you improve that. Thank you. I actually finished faster than I thought. Jason, I'm open for questions.
You're muted, Jason. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that.
There
I
you
hit
go,
the wrong,
back.
I think I unmuted somebody else. Apologies. Yeah, that's great, Catalina. Thank you for that awesome presentation. There were so many good takeaways in there, and I could tell you've been thinking about this a lot. It's very obvious, and you've done a lot of research as well. And so thank you for sharing that with us. And I definitely want to open it up for Q&A right now. We have plenty of time to answer any questions. And when I say we, I mean C. So definitely feel free. If you have a question you want to ask Catalina right now, you can unmute your mic and ask. And or if you're a little bashful, you can ask it in the chat and I'll ask her. So yeah, anybody has any questions? There was a lot of really interesting content
Oh,
in there.
one thing that I would like to add. So in response to COVID-19, I actually opened up my calendar a couple of
Oh,
hours
yes.
per week. I'm gonna pass the link over here with my calendar. So if we don't have time to cover all of the questions, I'm open for a quick half hour for additional questions or just keep saying during COVID.
That's wonderful. Thank you for putting that out there, Catalina. That's
Sure.
really generous of you to open your calendar up as well for folks, for the defenders here to reach out and connect and learn more. So definitely feel free to ask your questions right now. And
I have a question.
great.
Um, my name's Scott Fowler. I have a few other co-workers on this call. We work with the JB Hunt Trucking Company in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and we have our own design system team. I'm a UX designer.
Awesome.
We have developers. I mentioned to you earlier that we have developers embedded on our team, so we are involved in all the sprints and all of the agile processes already. I wish that we had, I was sharing with my coworker, I wish we had a content person involved and embedded in our team. We have someone involved, but and a researcher and other people. So right now, we're really well established. I guess my question is that we're in the middle of getting all these different documents that are flying around that were for the design system before we actually had a design system. So we're trying to collect all of those, and that's been kind of difficult having to pin those down. So what can you recommend about working with other teams to get things done? Like we have to basically, we do our prototypes, we do everything, and then it gets approved, it goes to dev. And then while it's going to right before it goes to dev, we have to send it to the content team to look at, correct any errors, to make sure that anything's done. So how do you recommend that maybe that we could improve on that process?
I think you kind of responded to your own question earlier by saying that you don't have a content team currently in your UX team. I can share some of those pain points, but approval takes a long time, and again, depending the company you're working for, if you're not a truly agile company, it might take even longer. But I think the easiest way is to have someone embedded within your team, or I'm a huge fan of trying to find advocates across the company. So if you have someone that and I don't know how rigid your organization is as well. Like if you really need the process by the book, then I don't know if this is going to work, to be honest with you. But find your advocates in that team. If you find someone that can help you out to get things done faster, talk to them and find out why it takes so long. Is it because the way how the design is being delivered? Is it just because of how their team works? Like, is it internal team inefficiency, or is it something that UX can improve upon? And I would even talk to the management of that team.
Yeah, and we have, and the problem is there's only 2 people on that team for the whole company.
That's true.
And they have a large backlog. Recently, one of the people has basically devoted themselves to our workload, but there are other workloads and stuff. I feel like that if we were to have another person strictly embedded on our team, that would solve that problem. But I didn't know if you had any other solutions or anything else.
No, I mean, it's tough when you're short-staffed, and it's tough when you're short-staffed. the fact that you're short-staffed and it doesn't sound like the design system work isn't necessarily a priority to them right now. And it's not necessarily because it doesn't matter, it's because they have a lot of work that they need to focus on. And because of that, they're spread really thin. So obviously, other things will trump the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, that's why this whole thing is iterative, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Sorry, couldn't help much.
There's a question from Robert in here about, first of all, he said, thanks for the great presentation. And there were several other folks who said that too. And what kind of group access have you seen or enjoyed with regard to sharing components among a group at a give enterprise? I'm not sure I understand that part. Among a enterprise so that UX and FED can have more tools in their toolbox and spend more time designing and less time reinventing the UI controls from scratch. Does that question make sense, Catalina?
I don't understand. I'm not sure what FED is personally. I do understand the last part of the question. And it sounds like it's I don't want to misspeak, so like oh,
Oh,
front end
front end
development.
dev.
Okay, acronyms.
That makes
So
sense.
let's think. What kind of group access have you seen in Jerry? So with the first part of the question, I do not understand it.
Robert, do you want to unmute and ask the question? Can you maybe elaborate?
Sure. I guess, I mean, for me, working in this role primarily as a contingent worker or a contractor, I see a lot of, job opportunity where they kind of wish they had a design system and they, people like us have gone into various companies on a temporary basis and helped them invent or define a design system. Other companies that are more mature along that scale may have kind of a rigid system where you're being paid to design, but you're not allowed to design anything because the templates are too rigid. And so I guess what I would love is if when I come into a company that says, I want you to use Sketch or InVision, if they already have a library of reusable components, of course, I'm going to come in and suggest new ones that when there isn't one that I need for my given application, and that will go through approval and vetting. And it should be an evolutionary process where they keep adding new things to that sandbox instead of having it be static. But what I see, the reason I asked you about your own experience, because I wish that I could, like those UI controls that don't come out of the box with a tool like Sketch or InVision. I wish the company already had those so we could just hit the ground running.
Yeah, it's tough. Someone reached out to me yesterday, and he asked a question in regards to how to address colors in the design system because he has so many colors and there are so many different applications at the organization. And I think step number one is a lot of organizations serve multiple products, but they don't think about it from an enterprise perspective. They think about it individually. So if an application has 5 different applications, you'll notice that each individual team is very concerned about their own work, but they don't think about the whole company as an entity. And that's when the problem starts shifting. And I think it has to do with the UX team that you guys are working with and the leadership as well. Like if there's no buy-in and there's no understanding of enterprise and organization as a whole, it's going to make things even more difficult. Now, what you can do when you go from a company to company, and I think I don't know, like UXers, like throughout the time that shift from organization to organization, we all have like our tools and things that we can reuse from the past. So, I mean, you can even compose that one general library for you general enough and have the colors built in as values or like nested layers so that when you go to the organization, you just apply branding. So then that way you don't have to start everything from scratch all over again and you can hit the ground running faster. But in terms of what they are doing, I don't know if as a contractor you necessarily have a lot of control because they have issues internally already because they see it as separate entities.
That's good advice. And I think it's, we try to be sort of tool agnostic, that if they're using a different tool from the one we're familiar with, we can come in and learn it within 2 or 3 weeks. and we can certainly contribute to that library of UI controls, I guess that you can't really do that as a sidebar of another project. That kind of has to be a project unto itself.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you for that question, Robert. Darren has a question. What's up, Darren? What's up, D? Darren did my show notes for several seasons. He's awesome. And Darren has a great question here. He said, first of all, he said, awesome job. And do you have any advice regarding mistakes one might make and should try to avoid when creating their design system from scratch?
Yes, I do. Do not sell the design system talking about consistency, because you're going to have product owners and stakeholders coming after you and telling you my application is not consistent. You made it worse.
You just insulted somebody's or somebody's too, possibly.
I mean, so, you know, the truth is, like, as I mentioned during the presentation, sadly, I didn't come across any organization, unless you work for like a place like Twitter or Facebook or like a really large corporate that like really sees the value of design, you know, like sadly Silicon Valley people, and I think they have their problems as well. But I don't think, I did not come across people that work at the organization, or I didn't come across organizations that see this value of consistency strong enough that when we talk about design system, it clicks so well, and we're doing such a great job at selling it that, you know, oh yeah, we are 100% on board. We're going to add this project on the roadmap, and next year we're going to tackle design consistency and uplift our entire UI. It is just not going to happen. A lot of us are working with very outdated applications. It is normal that as you're working through things to add more inconsistencies, but try to sell it from an accessibility perspective. So the new components and the new things that you're creating are solving accessibility issues. And even more so, you can build those things into the development process, like the way things are tagged for screen readers and so on. Now, as I mentioned, to be single A compliant, I think it's part of the single A compliant. I might be wrong. Consistency, it's one of the things that is being mentioned. So if you're not going to be single A compliant and you're not going to be double A compliant, and same like with design system accessibility, it takes a long time, but don't sell it with consistency, because you are going to end up creating more inconsistencies for the short period of time. But you are going to uplift the UI. You know, you're going to think about it from a mobile perspective. If your organization has any applications that are supposed to be working on mobile or websites, responsiveness, right? Mobile first, and accessibility. So I think these would be your sell points.
That's
Been
great.
there, it failed. They shut me down. I did not know what to respond to when I said consistency. Let's build it.
Yeah,
So,
that's a great answer, Catalina, and yeah, and Darren loved the answer too. So thank you. He says, yeah, that's and consistency is important, of course, as you touched on, but it can't be the only selling point. Like there's got to be, you're not going to get the organization to invest the time and especially the money into creating a design system by just saying, we just need more consistency. It's a compelling argument, right?
Right.
But,
And consistency, it's also a killer. Like it really is a killer, because if you come across, and this goes, I think, to the governance and maintenance of the design system, but if you come across edge cases, and if the components that you already created in the design system are not going to really help those edge cases, then what do? You either append, or you have to recreate the component, or do something, you know. So like you're not going to be able, like sometimes consistency, if you take it by the book, it is going to end up sacrificing a user experience, because you are going to come across new use cases, you're going to have new features, so those elements will have to change with time. So there are different things that the design system addresses. Consistency is just one of them, and probably one of the last ones once your system is mature enough to do that.
That's great. I have a question that's kind of piggybacks on your response there about how this is a living thing. This is not one and done, right? And there's a lot of agile implications. I can see why that marriage really works for you, see, because it is constantly iterative, right? There are things that are going to need to change. There's special projects that happen that maybe the existing system doesn't support. Okay, now we have to go and figure out how to create these components that work with our existing system. So I guess my question is, you mentioned maintenance in your presentation, and what does that look like? What is a general maintenance?
Do you want to do a part 3?
Oh my gosh, I know. I had a feeling like that would be, we probably don't have
Oh my
enough
God.
time to answer that question.
So it's kind of funny. So like last time someone asked me a question in regards to design system for like multiple applications, and I think like the last week, that's like one part that I've been focusing on, like how you maintain design system for multiple application and how you maintain design system in general. And actually at my company today, I put together a process flow about how to maintain the design system. So that is a tough one because there are so many different use cases. Like the classic use case is you identify the need of a new component. You're gonna check your library, see if that component can solve for the problem you're trying to solve, and if it's addressing the business needs and the requirements. And if it does that, then you're all set. If it doesn't, and if it really is a need, number one is, do we need to create a new component from scratch, or you can append to one of the existing ones? So maybe a drop-down menu that has an additional selection to it or something else. So that's a use case when you need to append to a system or creating a tertiary button. Or it becomes complicated when we're dealing with applications that let's say are run by Android, or you have iOS. And I think design system become very complicated from mobile when designers are creating a lot of custom components. So material design and iOS and a lot of those things have out of the box functionalities and out of the box design. When we design, we as designers and also for developers, again, step one, if those out of the box components do address the business needs and the user needs, then we don't need to create custom components. If we create custom components, and that's the time when we add those things to the design system. Otherwise, it's just a branding issue and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. But again, that's a whole other, I'm gonna start putting together part 3, and I'm gonna ping you when it's done.
Hey, Scott Fowler, for one, is definitely interested in a part 3. So we may have to do that. Part 3 might be about maintaining a design system. There's a lot to this stuff.
It is.
So I'm for it. We can
Okay.
we'll plan. Does anybody else want a part 3?
Hands up.
Raise your hand or say, "Oh, yeah, okay, we got a few." Yeah, we got folks responding. Part 3, okay. Catalina and I will work on that. That's great that you're interested in that. I am too. This is really important stuff. Yep, a lot of folks. So there's one more question. We may have time for one more. I'm gonna try to sneak one that I have in real quick. This might be a quick one for me, but what about snippets? Are code snippets critical when you have a design system that's like in production, like on a website or something that folks can look at? Is it critical to have code snippets there or not? And why?
I think the code snippets can help recognize like the class and like the naming convention, and like not all of the design system do that. And one of the biggest trap that I see people falling is like we're trying to follow what those big corporations do for their design system. They have public design system because they're a public company and so on. You don't need to follow that. Ask your developers. If it makes sense for them, that's fine. If not, then just deliver their design using Zeppelin. They have the inspect tool. I think the most important things are the naming conventions. So it's a matter of like how we name things. For instance, in my experience in the past and currently, like I've already developed like 3 design systems, one of them being internally. So one of the things that I always try to tackle down is naming conventions. So that's when developers are going through my design using the inspect tool or using everything else, they get to see the same classes, the same naming conventions, how they have it on their CSS file. And that goes a long way. And if those naming conventions are aligned, then you don't need that. Like, again, like think about the usage, who's going to use it? And do you even need that website necessarily? Is that component library and the way you're delivering your design is going to be fine? Because the term of design system doesn't necessarily mean that public website guidelines and all the fun stuff. Like, you need to do what makes sense for your company. If for your company makes sense to have Zeppelin or an Envision design library and a component library for the developers, no guidelines, and that's totally fine.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great. One more quick one, I think, maybe. But one more question. This is an interesting question from OSIS, if I said that right. And it is a kind of a continuation of our, how do you know what items to add to this design system? So the question is, how would you determine what edge case is worth adding to the design system without the design system becoming a piggy bank for every new item created? That's a great question.
Yeah. So in the past, after we had the design system, people were reaching out to me and they were saying, hey, I have this like filter icon I use. Can I add it to the system? No. So I think number one, it's a matter of like, is it used across the entire organization or is it used in just one spot? If it's used in just one spot, see if you can leverage anything existent. But if it becomes prominent and if it is going to be used across enterprise, then sure, you can add it. But if it's a one-time thing, then no.
That makes sense. Catalina, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming back for part two. And it sounds like we may have a part three in the works. May need to give you some time to put together that presentation.
Sure.
But Defenders still on the call here, and folks checking it out after, definitely keep tabs. You can join the email list. I'm trying to get better at emailing. I'm so bad at it. But I'm trying to get better to keep you all apprised of things going on. So you can do that, userdefenders.com/join, I think is what that is. And I'll definitely keep you apprised. And also the events page. Keep tabs or bookmark the events page I just added recently, userdefenders.com/events. And I do want to mention too, in 2 weeks from today, there's a session coming up with Justin Dower, who is a former guest on the show, all about culture and the design culture and the marriage of design and culture. And it is an important topic because we work with people. We don't get to choose, just like you don't get to choose your family, you don't get to choose the people you work with often either. So it is really important to find yourself in a really good culture. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks. But Catalina, before we go, can you tell our Defenders the best way to connect and to keep up with you? Because I know they're going to want to.
Yeah, so LinkedIn, I am there. I think I have my website at the end of each presentation. So Jason, I'm going to send you the PDF files for both presentations. And I also pasted something earlier in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and do it again. If you guys have any additional questions, open up my calendar. Feel free to book 30 minutes and let's discuss further. I might not have all of the answers. I'm still learning about this myself, but anything I can do, help, grab a coffee, let's chat.
Ah, so great. And a lot of wonderful kudos from the community. Thank you all for being here. And I appreciate you all. I appreciate your heart for design and for making things better and for fighting for the users, because that's really what this all comes down to. Like, we're fighting for the users and we're fighting to make things better. And so I appreciate you all very much. Again, Catalina, thank you so much for offering your design systems superhero powers to us. This has really been enriching. So stay tuned for part three. Thank you all very much. And last but not least, fight on, my friends.